Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I am your co-host, Ray Russell, here along for the ride. Now, we've been hanging out in the 1980s as of late, guys, but we're heading back to the 1970s now. Bob Roop returning from a tour of Australia, and he's heading off to Jim Crockett Promotions, the old Mid-Atlantic territory. And to hear the stories of the Mid-Atlantic run, we're going to bring him back on right now. Sir, welcome back, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, thank you, sir. That's sir. I always feel about 100 years old when I hear that, but it's nice, courtesy's good. Well, it's good hearing your voice again. I mean, knowing that we're actually on the air together, before too long, I can listen to my own voice, which, of course, every egomaniac likes to hear themselves talk.
Didn't get enough of those Bob Roop Mid-South promos?
Yeah, that's a good one too. So anyways, I'm glad we're back and, onward and upward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've got so much still to cover in your career, but so many other names that you encounter. It's just amazing as I scroll through the list, not just here in Mid-Atlantic, but just in general of all the names that you're going to come in contact with. Maybe not in the ring with, but they're in the same territory at the same time as you, so you still may even have a story about them, whether you stepped in the ring with them or not. So looking forward as we continue on. And like I said, we were just in the 1980s, and that's my favorite decade, guys. So we will go back to that era again, I promise you that much. But right now, we head back. We were telling your story from the beginning, and last we left off 1973, and that, we'll call it the Fuller fiasco, the debacle in Australia, where Buddy Fuller tried to run his own promotion, push his son, Ron, which it can't really be said that it was Ron's fault. A lot of the talent that we had known in that territory had left when Jim Barnett departed and the quote-unquote sold the territory to Mr. Buddy Fuller. And it comes up, belly up, and you get out of Dodge just in the nick of time, and you head back to the States, Bob, and you come back to work for Jim Crockett Promotions. The problem is you return here and begin wrestling there in the Mid-Atlantic in May of 1973, but sadly, on April 1st of 73, Jim Crockett Sr. passes away. Yeah,
that was, I had met him. I think when he came to Florida, he was down there one time, and I met him in the Florida wrestling office, but I might have seen him in Charlotte too, but I never had a private conversation with him or anything. Mm-hmm. So, he was, let's face it, he had, I think, the biggest territory in the country. He was running 2 or 3 towns a night. He was one of the top dogs in the business at that time, and I didn't hear a lot of griping about, you always had your typical, we're getting screwed on our payoffs type griping went on every night. But I didn't hear a lot of, for example, Nick Goulas. I never had too many people, heard many people say not one thing nice about Nick Goulas. Mm-hmm. They worked for him. Some of them worked for him 3 or 4 times. Nobody had anything good to say about it. He wasn't respected, let's put it that way.
Right.
Crockett Sr. was respected. So,
well, if I remember correctly, Crockett Sr., I think he goes, his era as a promoter goes back many, many decades prior to this. And it's sad to see that, he passes away here because you're right. He was one of the quote unquote good ones, Bob. He was always put over pretty well by the boys. I don't know necessarily just as a good payoff guy, but in general, people seem to get along with Jim Crockett Sr.
Yeah, and I didn't have a chance to know his offspring that well.
Okay.
David Jr. and Jackie Crockett. I knew Jackie a little bit when I was there. He was friendly.
He was cameraman, right?
Yeah, and he was a friendly guy. Like typical. He didn't coast on his father's coattails.
Right.
He spoke up. He was friendly. He was personable. I felt when I talked to him, I felt like he was genuine. Okay. And but a lot of times the children of successful men don't have the same qualities that their father did, or their mother, if it's a female that's famous. What the offspring of the Crockett's, what they did with the promotion after Senior died, wasn't anywhere near that kind of expertise he had when he was still alive. But with not long after that, the Vince McMahon did his take over the whole country thing. So I don't know if anybody could have stuck around that long.
Funny you mentioned that, because Crockett Sr., everybody goes on and on. Vince McMahon killed the territories, Vince McMahon national expansion, blah, blah, blah. But let's be real here. There was a lot of territories that tried to grab a little extra piece of the pie, kind of move in on other people's areas, so to speak, including the Crockett promotion here. They were slowly trying to get into Eastern Tennessee, into a little bit of West Virginia. They were even creeping over into Savannah, Georgia. So everybody was doing it. We know Ole does it too later on. So it's just kind of interesting to see what they were doing. They were really trying to expand the territory here. And they had a lot of, North Carolina, South Carolina, of course, Virginia. So they had a good little piece of the mid-Atlantic, I guess is aptly put in regards to describing the territory's area.
Oh, yeah. They had they had the promotional, not just the rights, but have established themselves in those areas. And they had local promoters who were all, apparently, I don't know whether it came through trial and error or just old man Crockett found good people. Maybe it was retired wrestlers. But he had local promoters in those towns that were doing, we were talking about when we were talking about Roy Shire.
Right.
We talked about the local promoters he had. And so if he had good people in the towns, they were, that was an asset. You had somebody who was taking care of the town, making sure all the things that need to be done and promotional, make sure the ad got in the paper, the posters went up, radio ads took place, all the things that went with having a successful promotion. That stuff didn't just happen by accident. You have to stay on top of it. So Crockett Senior had a smooth running, as far as I know, a smooth running operation. After 30, 40 years, I guess he should have, but once he was gone, the dynamic changes because the Jim Crockett Jr. didn't have the clout of his father. He didn't have the reputation. And
much to everyone's surprise at the time, I'm sure even the Crockett boys, it wasn't David Crockett or Jim Crockett Jr. that initially received the control of the company. It was, in fact, the daughter, Frances Crockett's husband, John Ringley, who was given the keys to the mansion, so to speak, to run the territory. And I guess he kind of caroused himself out of that job.
Well, Senior probably understood that the boys weren't ready. So I don't know if he'd been grooming and wrangling. What little I knew about. No, this guy was a nice-looking man, smooth, suave, intelligent. He was a good businessman, but he took over a business that was a multi-million-dollar, many multiple millions of dollars, maybe $100 million a year business. So that gives you a lot of power. And, you have the wherewithal to be able to hire and fire as many as what? How many wrestlers were there? 30? Running 2 or 3 towns a night, you'd have all kinds of people, but, all kinds of talent. But, we'll get into he's an integral part of the reason I left,
awesome.
Like we talked about earlier.
Well, that's not really awesome, but that's kind of,
right.
That's cool that he factors into your story. So I'm looking forward to that when we get to, I guess, the end of your run here, working for the Crockett territory. But yeah, John Ringley, for those who don't know, like I said, was the husband of Frances Crockett, which we heard her name come up from time to time on TV throughout the 80s and maybe into the 90s as well. She was the daughter of Jim Crockett Sr., of course. David Crockett, everybody remembers him from TV in the 80s. He was one of the announcers, but later on, he became one of the head producers backstage. I know he was in charge of putting some of the stuff up in the arenas and some maybe getting everything together for the production aspect of the show. So David was there even through the Turner bought run. Jim Crockett Jr., for those who do know him, obviously he wound up taking over for John Ringley here and controlled the Crockett promotion, the NWA, all the way through 88. He sells out to Ted Turner there when he runs out of money. So that's where we're at with the Crockett family. But now we're going to look at your flight back from Australia. You head over to the mainland of the United States of America once again, and you're here in the Carolinas, the Kakalakis, guys. And Bob Roop, we talked off air a little bit. I said, do you remember how you got here in regards to who got you the job? Did you make a phone call? And you really didn't recall because, well, let's face it, Bob, you're going to be working. I was looking ahead, various territories over the next several years. So you weren't 100% positive, but you talked about Jerry Briscoe being here, a friend of yours off and on, Thunderbolt Patterson at the time. he was here, you hung out with him a little bit. Do you think maybe one of those guys just gave some word, or do you even want to speculate?
I'm trying to jog my memory here. I think Eddie Graham might have gotten me booked in there because my deal in Australia, with Eddie Graham booked me in Australia.
Right, he sent you over there to kind of keep an eye on everything.
Yeah, and he promised me $1,400 a week. And when I got over there, Fuller got all the boys together before our first show and told everybody was going to be making $700 a week. And I was standing there, he had all of us in the same room. It's like 7 or 8, 9, 10 guys all standing like shoulder to shoulder in a small room. He's standing there in front of us. Just so awkward, But anyway, so I talked to Barnett immediately after that meeting. He promised me a couple $100 more a week, but that wasn't going to get it done. So I gave my notice. And I think when I came back to Florida, I know Eddie Graham didn't want me hot at him because, I'm just getting started in my career. And he knows that there's a chance of, him making serious money with me over the next 10, 15 years. So I think when I came back there, I think I came back to Florida. And I'm not sure if I worked, but I think Eddie might have gotten me booked when I let him know, because when I called him or when I talked to him, one of the reasons I let him know was that, hey, you told me $1,400, and I'm not getting it. So that's why I called him, because I said that's why I'm leaving. I want you to know I'm not giving my notice to you. I'm giving my notice to Buddy Fuller because I told him what you had offered, told me I was going to be making, and he just ignored it. So I have no choice but to give my notice. I'm not. If you go ahead and do that, if you do that, you've made it known that you were expecting something, and you're told, well, you're not going to get it, and you stick around. Well, that's when you're a stooge. That's when and you know it too, because you were promised one thing. You talk about the classic bait and switch. You think, well, now we got you here in Australia. Oh no, you're not going to make that. You're going to make this. And so anyway, I think Eddie felt some kind of remorse or a way to deal with it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, cutting your money in half is quite the discrepancy. It's not like he's shaving 100 off, which is still a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but to go from 14 to 7, I don't even understand that. And then you're being told you're going to get the same pay as the guy working the curtain jerker too, which is just really weird. But
well, on top of that, think about this. On top of that, I'm expected to go out there and wrestle against anybody who enters this tournament they're having.
Right.
And they were making it open to people out in the public. And I did wrestle 2 or 3 guys that were
non-pro wrestlers.
I mentioned on other shows, I wrestled a couple of guys that were from the audience or spectators. And I also went out there against a couple of boys, and I'll repeat it. Guys I'd already worked with that were like, I don't want to say job guys, but they were locals that Barnett had used, and usually the way he used them, he put them either on TV or in a house show. They always beat them. I mean, they weren't getting pushed, but they were a body you could throw in. There'd be somebody different for a change. I use them every 6 weeks or so. So anyway, I'm going against these guys in a match in front of an audience in Sydney, and they think that we're working. They think we're going to come out there to work. And Buddy, I told Fuller, I said, Buddy, these guys are smart. I can't go out there and stretch these guys. He said, nah, just stretch them. So I told the guys, I said, he wants me to
stretch them.
I just hated that attitude too. You talk about having respect for your talent. So I went out and told the guys, I'll repeat what I did. I said, I just told the guys in the ring, I said, look, they want me, and they figured I was going to beat them anyway. I mean, it wasn't like a big deal. Right. But I wouldn't, and I did. I pretended like I got the sugar hold on them, and I didn't really. I didn't knock them out. So it wasn't just a $700, but I'm also risking my butt here. Every time you go out against somebody, you never know.
You can get a thumb in that eye, and you might not have an eye anymore. So you never know what they're going to do to try to retaliate. I mean, it's a danger. Obviously, you just slip in the wrong way at the wrong time, and anybody can do anything. So That was always crazy to me, those shoots that they wanted you guys to go out there, specifically you to go out there and do. And it's done time and time again. We know Eddie Graham did it with you. We know Buddy Fuller did it with you. We know Jim Barnett tries to get you to do it. So it's funny, it's like, you're like, yeah, but this is not really cool, guy. Yeah, but go do it anyway. That's okay.
Yeah. Well, about the shooting, I might have told this story. Short-term memory is not always as great as the long-term, but it also might bear repeating. Ronnie Garvin was working in Fort Myers every Tuesday night, and apparently there was a guy down there that was giving him a lot of crap about I could beat you, and Ronnie was a heel. Let me think, was he? Well, it doesn't matter. But this guy was challenging. He wanted to get in there. So Ronnie said, well, come on up to Tampa to the Sportatorium, and they'll give you a tryout. So who was going to give him the tryout was me. So I came, I was still doing it in those days. So I get in the ring with this guy. He shows up in a suit. I mean, like a business suit with a tie and all that. So I had him take his jacket off, and I got in the ring. I mean, he was about 5'8", about 165, 70 pounds, and about 50 years old. I mean, it was pathetic as far as him being any kind of a challenge. So I took him down, and I didn't put the sugar hold on him because I'm not sure if I didn't know it yet or for whatever reason, I made sure there was no way he could hurt me. I had his arms bundled up, and there was no way he could bite me or anything else. And Ronnie was there watching, and somebody else said something, and I turned to face him. And when I did, I turned my face towards the guy in the direction of the guy's feet. I don't know if he did it on purpose or involuntary or what. He pulled up his knee, he kneed me right in the mouth, and he knocked my lower lip over my teeth to where it came through my lip, actually. And, that's not a serious injury, but it's like having a cold sore in your mouth for like a month.
Yeah.
It's what a pain in the butt, I mean, you can't kiss your wife without, discomfort. So, I lost it. I went, because it was so, just innocuous. It was unbelievable that this guy could hurt me, and I ended up chasing him out of the building. I was in just a pair of undertights, no shoes, no shirt, barefoot, and I chased this guy. It was TV day, and there was a bunch of people waiting in the lobby of the Snake Pit there, buying tickets for TV or getting their tickets for TV. And there was a lineup of, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 people. And I chased this guy by him. He's screaming, "Help, help!" And I'm chasing after him. I'm calling him the MFer and you no good SOB and all that. I'm screaming at him. I'm supposed to be a babyface. And I chased him all the way out of the Sportatorium, across the street. And when he beat me, he was panicked. He took wings. He could run pretty quick, figuring he was going to get killed. And he when he hit this patch of across the street from the Sportatorium was an open field, and it was full of it was all dirt and rocks, and it was full of stickers too. And because I had bare feet, I took about 2 steps, and I realized I was getting stickers in my foot, or my feet, so I had to stop and turn around. But I remember walking back by those people who had been in line. When I walked back by them, they were still all looking at me, and about half of them had their jaw hanging down about 4 inches. Like, what the hell is that all about? Me chasing some little old man out of there screaming, I'm going to kill him. Oh, man. So, yeah.
Well, it was good publicity for your character, right? I mean,
well, I'm laughing about it now, but the moral of the story is that a shooting is risky.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even the most unobtrusive looking, harmless looking guy can hurt you. Back to Australia, he's asking me to take on people from the audience.
Yeah. Who
knows
right.
what's going to show up? And I want to go back to something you said earlier. To this day, now he said it wasn't Ron Fuller's fault for what happened in Australia, but to me, in a sense, it is.
Okay.
Because Ron wasn't some brand new guy, and so that he would go out there in a shoot against anybody is just totally. He didn't know jack diddly squat about shooting it.
Yeah, and what you're talking about there is that Buddy thought it would be a good idea to put his son out there in a hooker position like yourself to take on any and all comers from the crowd. So
and they killed Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, and he got out of there when the getting was good. Buddy sent Ron back to the States as well, and it wasn't very long after that Buddy just closed up shop and gave up after just a few months of trying to run the Australia territory. Yeah, that we covered that before, guys. You go back and check that out. That was a fun episode. We talked all about a couple of your Australia tours, but you've got another one upcoming, so we'll be getting into that one in the future as well. No, I don't want to get too far off topic, but yeah, no, you're totally right. I wasn't thinking about that specific incident. I was just thinking of putting Ron in a main event position where he really hadn't been up to that point in his career. And on top of that, like I said, most of the top talent had left outside of like Spiros Arion, Mario Milano, which I believe they were all baby faces, so that didn't really help either.
Well, those guys weren't at that meeting of the $700.
I'm sure they weren't, because they wouldn't have been there anymore if they'd heard that.
No, they had their guarantee already.
I have no doubt.
Well, knowing that, how do you think I felt?
Sure.
All of a sudden, I'm going to be a stooge. I'm not saying the other guys were stooges. They probably had an idea. Maybe $700 a week was a lot of money to them. I don't know, but it was pretty good pay. But like I say, if I had been offered and told I would be making $700, that'd be one thing. But anyway, onward and upward.
Sure, we're heading back to the Carolinas, and I was just really now what you said about Eddie Graham maybe getting you in here in Crockett makes a lot more sense now that I go back and look, because you leave Australia in mid-April. You obviously come back to the States, I would have to imagine, at some point, right? And then you don't start wrestling for Crockett until near the end of May. So there's about at least a 5-week hiatus there in between. So it's likely that you did come back home, quote unquote, home to Florida at this point in time, and you kind of did whatever you were doing. Maybe you were in the snake pit a little bit. Who knows what was going on? But clearly, at some point, you get your way in the door here. You're in now the Carolinas, and you're once again, like in Amarillo, like in Australia, eventually we were talking about in Mid-South, you're going to come upon a ton of new talent that maybe you hadn't seen or stepped in the ring with before. And there's a lot of big names here that were the big players in the JCP, the Jim Crockett Promotion territory, right before the big takeoff in the late 70s. And I'm not saying it wasn't over here. This was a huge territory even here, but later on, obviously, as they expanded, television expanded for them. And in the videotape, we can trade tapes and we can see some of the guys, the later guys, Orndorff, Snookup, Mass Superstar, Steamboat, Flair. Yeah, so this is the troupe that was here prior to that, the guys that really set the foundation for the Crockett promotion. And in the names, it's a who's who, really, Bob, of the talent from the time period. And right off the bat, I see a couple of names here, which were a huge tag team and equally scary in singles as well. And I'm talking about the guy by the name of the Profile Rip Hawk and Big Swede Hanson. And you step in the ring with them, at least at some point in time throughout this time period. Now, you may not remember the one match you had or the couple matches you had with these guys, but did you remember crossing paths with either of these guys?
Well, I definitely remember a match with Swede Hanson. It was on television, and they put me over. I mean, I gave him...
Oh, wow.
I didn't give him one shoulder breaker, but they felt like he was too over. He was too... he was been established at this big, this big, strong, immovable object, mountain of a man. And, compared to, he was high. Well, I think he was 6, 7, 8 inches taller than Rip Hawk. His main partner when they were hot in there.
Right.
And so I gave him one shoulder breaker, and he kicked out. And that, that's what they wanted to do. And I gave him a second one, and then he stayed down. But and I hurt my back doing it because he was a load to get up. But get up on my shoulder.
Sure. But, and I'm sure Swede wasn't used to being up in that position either. So
no. Well, I got to take the shoulder breaker a few times during my career, and it is a little bit unsettling. Your face is aiming at the mat, and all of a sudden you're plummeting downward. If there's nothing to stop you, which fortunately that knee or that upper thigh of the leg below you is there for your shoulder to bounce off of. But now in another shoot I had one time, I speared a guy from off my shoulder and almost broke his neck. I didn't mean to, but
right.
He instead of ducking his head, he went the other way and
pushed it backwards.
Very fortunate. I didn't break. I didn't mean to.
Right.
But it was a shoot with someone from coming into challenge, trying to be a wrestler, and I was just trying to protect myself. So Yeah, and I remember that because Swede was obviously these guys were all about 8 to 10 years older than me, but
Hmm.
plus they'd also been in the business about at least 10 years longer than I had, maybe in some cases more. So they were not just established, but they knew the office hold. They knew what was going on. They'd been featured in main events in different places, not just the Carolinas, but other places too. So, and this is, I'm in it at the entry level. So I mentioned on another one of our programs that I didn't hang around with main event guys because I felt like, again, they were all master sergeants and I was a corporal or a PFC.
Hmm.
And I felt like they had the seniority, and to hang around with them, what are we going to talk about? They don't want to talk about amateur wrestling, and I couldn't talk about pro wrestling with them because, again, all these guys had so much more experience than I did. So I was kind of stuck hanging around with people that I either knew, which in the Carolinas was Jerry Briscoe and Thunderbolt Patterson,
Uh-huh.
and the other thing was with any of this stuff at this stage of my career, and then we go all the way back to Australia. I had my girlfriend with me. She was like an emotional support for me at the time. So I was a lot of times if I could, we'd travel. I'd actually take her to shows. We usually wouldn't go in, but not every night, but a couple of times a week. So I didn't ride with the boys a lot. I was never in a car with Rip Hawk or Swede Hanson. Thunderbolt, Jerry Briscoe, yeah. But I knew those guys from Florida, so.
That's very interesting, though, because you're talking about TV where they protected the top talent, and yet Swede Hanson's doing a job for you on television. So clearly, was Johnny Weaver the booker at this point? Who was booking Mid-Atlantic when you came in there? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was Weaver.
Okay, so clearly somebody said something to somebody about give this guy a push, because to do a job on TV, to have Swede Hanson, of all people, the big Swede, do a job on television to your finisher. Now, granted, a couple of them it took to put him down, which is pretty impressive for the time, but to go over on Swede Hanson on TV is not just, something to scoff at. That's a huge deal.
Yeah, and looking back at it, yes, of course it was. Again, though, I didn't, like any place else, I didn't watch the TV there. I didn't watch it while it was being made. I wasn't somewhere where I could watch a monitor. And when it played, I wasn't going to, not that I had anything against it, but I didn't feel a need to do it. I'd already, so I didn't know all I knew about people's stature was from the house shows. Mm-hmm. And, Swede and Rip were in main event type heels.
Right.
Ole and Gene Anderson were up there. Weaver was a main event babyface. And, you knew that Thunderbolt, they were getting Thunderbolt ready to be one. Jerry was, I'm not sure Jerry was like main event, but he would be up there in featured matches because he was a good talent. And I know he stayed there a long time. I think he was driving a Porsche, so he must have been doing pretty well.
You think?
Yeah.
But for those who don't know, because you mentioned a lot of tag teams there, Crockett Promotions was known as a tag team territory. It wasn't uncommon for the main event to feature tag teams like Swede Hanson and Rip Hawk, Johnny Weaver and George Becker. They dominated the 1960s into the early 70s as the top babyface tag team. And of course, the Andersons, Lars, and then Gene and Ole. So, and then I think George Scott was there with Sandy at some point too as a brother tag team. There's a lot of tag teams on top here. And during your stay, you got to encounter quite a few of these guys in the ring, Swede and Rip Hawk. You got any memories of Rip Hawk? If not, we'll move on. He was kind of a showman, but another scary dude.
Well, he was a lot more social than Swede was. I looked at a picture of Swede, and Swede had a look. He looked like he was either very tired or drugged. But
Swede looked like a zombie sometimes, right?
Yeah, he had this look in his eye, kind of like, leave me alone. I don't really want to talk to anybody here. Rip was more personable. And later on in life, I had a chance to interact with him a little bit, but up there, no. Again, I said that a few minutes ago about like even the Andersons, Ole and Gene, they were main event heels, and they were figured in everywhere they're going. I didn't feel comfortable like trying to like go into a dressing room and go over and sit down next to Ole and Gene. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. I'd find a place where if anybody wanted to approach me, and I did that in every territory, I would find myself, but not where I was hiding, but where I'd be off, in a place kind of by myself. If someone wanted to come up and talk to me, they could, but the start, just find out the lay of the land. Sometimes you come in, you're not figured in, and if you aren't, and guys know, and some places they know you aren't, they won't give you the time of day because why should they? And I didn't. Again, I had my girlfriend with me. Now, I tell you about getting a horrible start. One of the first things I remember was coming to a TV, and they had set up. They were having a tryout for a kid that was wanted to break into wrestling.
Is this Crockett you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was Don Kernodle.
Oh, and, yes, the Kernodle story. You going to tell that now?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Well, this is where it happened.
Okay, well, we'll tell it right now, guys. I just want to set the stage for everybody. For those who don't know, Don Kernodle goes on to become one half of the World Tag Team Champions with Sergeant Slaughter in the early 80s. That was the glory days of Don Kernodle's career. They had an epic feud against Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood for the tag team titles, a huge war that sold out tons of money all around the Horn there in the Crockett territory. But he got his start, so to speak, way back here in 1973. And I'll let you take it from here, Bob.
Yeah, I don't know if he had gone to Gene Anderson's school or somebody else's, and they'd shown some talent or whatever, but for whatever reason, and it wasn't on TV. This was at TV, but the cameras weren't on. But I was asked to come down there early, and I don't know, there was 25 wrestlers there. 20 of them I didn't know or I'd never met. Mm-hmm. But I remember Ole and Gene were, and the reason I thought maybe he had been at Gene's wrestling school is because they were front and center for everything. And so anyway, I get in there with Don. He weighs, I don't know, 180 pounds, 190, something like that. And I'm weighing about, 250, 260. And his background, he was a wrestler in college.
Yeah.
He had wrestled at a little school called Elon College in North Carolina. But he was an amateur wrestler. And
I think he lettered all 4 years.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if you know anything about amateur wrestling, it's much harder to put a hook on guys like that. Right. Like even the front face lock. Because guys are just used to whatever you try to do on them in amateur wrestling, they know either to go with it or how to counter it somehow or block it. So let me digress just for a second. To train for the Olympics in '68, the summer before going to the camp, the 2 months of the summer, every day in morning I ran. We had a lake at the campus. It was a 5-mile trail around the lake, and I ran it in the morning and I ran it at night, and then I also worked out during the day on the mat. So I did that 2 5-mile runs every day for like months. At the Olympics, at altitude, a mile-high altitude, in training, I had to put the other heavyweight in the Olympics on my back and do a mile with the guy on piggyback.
Right.
So you had, in order to have that kind of conditioning, that's what it takes to get great conditioning. Well, before I went out there against Don Kernodle, I don't know if I'd run 5 miles total in that year before. I had no cardiovascular ability. I didn't need it.
Are you making excuses, Bob?
Yes, I am. Well, I'm just pointing out the obvious that, first of all, if you don't beat a guy, if you can't beat someone who is a mark, so to say, someone you're the pro wrestler, and this is a wannabe. If you can't beat him within 5 minutes or so, you failed. Doesn't matter what happens after that. And I didn't feel like I wasn't a heel yet. I was a babyface. Otherwise, I might have smacked him or something, but I don't think so. That wasn't my MO. But anyway, I went 7 or 8 minutes with him, and that was my Ron Fuller time where I was blowed up and embarrassed, and I couldn't do anything to him. I'd have to say that my ineptitude or lack of conditioning might have had some bearing on him getting a start. and a good start, because I had this reputation of, being a big bad wolf, and I couldn't do anything with him. So automatically, a lot of my credibility went on to him. Not that I lost a lot of it. I think the boys, because I could still take someone who couldn't wrestle at all and handle them. Sure. And the boys that went against me in the ring knew that most of them didn't have any amateur wrestling background. They knew I could handle them easily because they didn't know anything. They didn't even know how to defend themselves. So I still had that kind of credibility or fear, if that's how you want to say it, from some of the wrestlers. But anyway, that got Don over. But boy, did I feel like 2 cents waiting for change after that one.
Well, Don was deceptively strong because, as most wrestlers are anyway, because they got the balance in with everything else. But I think he had won like the national arm wrestling championship at least once, if not twice. So he had some form of a background in wrestling, obviously, all through college. Did you know that getting in the ring with him? Did anybody tell you anything about this guy when you got in the ring with him? Could you tell immediately that this guy knows something? Like, how did that play out? Okay.
Nobody told me, but I knew. Everything I tried, he blocked. I could tell he was. I could tell the way we started on our feet.
Right.
And I could tell the way he got in a wrestling pose. Most people who don't have amateur wrestling, when you face them on their feet, they just stand there. They don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
He got in a wrestling pose, and like to try to take him down. And that's the thing. I didn't try to take him down. I tried to get hooks on him. I tried to, like a front face lock, get him, managed to get him down. I did get in the ropes. I I went over the top of his head, got kind of a front face lock, pulled him down on the mat, and tried to go for the sugar hold, but he countered it. I couldn't do it.
To the best of your recollection, how did this thing end? Do you remember exactly how this shoot ended?
Well, after 7 or 8 minutes, embarrassment had got past being embarrassing. It was humiliating. Mm-hmm. I just I stuck my hand out and said, "Hey, my hat's off to you, man. You know what you're doing. What else was I going to do?" I did in a way care, but in another way, I didn't care about what those guys thought about my ability as a shooter. I knew that I could handle myself one-on-one against anybody in a fight or a wrestling or whatever. And, we're in the wrestling business together. I'm not going to be fighting any of my colleagues or anything. And as far as my reputation as a shooter, I hated that anyway. Right. I look back on it now, and I've been thinking I would have had him beat me. That way, well, Roop used to be a shooter, but it was a tough guy.
It was a win-win for the Andersons because they were indeed they trained Don Kernodle. So it was almost like a rib on you, Bob. It was like, well, one of two things is going to happen. Either Kernodle's going to go in there and show you up, maybe not show you up, but hold his ground, which he did, or Bob's going to get the best of him, and we really can't lose either way here. So this is going to be fun. You said they were kind of front and center to watch this. So it's it's like they had both dogs in the fight, right? It's like no matter who wins, it's just going to be fun for us. So
they were definitely, especially Ole was definitely interested, and because I remember that. I thought, why are they so into this? This guy is, I didn't realize they had any association with him.
Yeah, they were credited as training Don.
Well, it wasn't until, if you want to know the truth, it wasn't until today, and I was looking over Gene Anderson's background, that I saw he had a wrestling school.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
I remember that.
Assumed he did.
Right.
Well, and now I think back too, Ole told me about their school and what they used to do.
I've heard stories about their school. I don't know if you know a wrestler by the name of Al Snow, but that was the first place he tried to go break in, and he had a good back and forth with Ole, and Al wouldn't give up, but Ole, basically tried to persuade him not to become a wrestler physically, right. And Al really held his ground there with Gene and Ole, and they tried to wear him out with, calisthenics and things like that. And then they tried to break him down in the ring. And I guess they kind of messed him up pretty good, but Al just kept coming. And, I don't know where he wound up finishing up his training, but he talked about his encounter. I remember years ago in the Anderson school. So it was not a fun place to be.
Well, a lot of those guys had their school should have been called the bait and switch school. You become a pro wrestler, give us all our money
up front.
$1,000, 1,500, 2,000, whatever. Give it all up front, and we guarantee you, if you can make it, you'll be a pro wrestler. Well, like you say, they make a guy. Harley was taking on a guy one time, and he made the guy run the bleachers in this stadium or this arena we were at.
Mm-hmm.
He made him run the stairs and up and down the bleachers. The guy'd run one lap and he'd be ready to collapse. He'd make him. Then he made him do 100, 200 push-ups and
right.
300 squats. And by the time the guy even got in the ring, he was blown. He was completely blown up.
Yeah.
So and then they're easy to beat then. But the idea was to get their money up front and then run the guys off.
Mm-hmm.
That way, you had room for new marks, new suckers to come in. And I disapprove of that myself. I don't like that. But I mean,
that's pretty shady business practice.
Well,
I mean, it's a quick way to make a buck. Don't get me wrong. That's a good chunk of change, especially back then. I mean, even now, really, give me $1,500 so I can make you run around. I mean, I wish somebody would pay me money to tell them what to do. I mean, that would be tremendous.
Now removed, so there's so much time. But at that time in the wrestling business, they weren't that far removed from the carnival part of pro wrestling, which was at the athletic show, where it was, they had a big tent up at all these fairs and circuses, not circuses, but fairs that were a big deal in the summertime because before air conditioning, you didn't entertain indoor in the summer. The buildings were too hot.
Right.
People weren't going to come in, even in the evening. It was still too hot to have, come to watch a basketball game or whatever you might have in the summer. That show was outdoors at these fairs, and the deal was, if you can beat the pro wrestler in for 6 minutes or whatever, 3 rounds or whatever, if you can even stay with him, you'll get money. If you beat him, you get $10 or whatever. Back in that, where $10 then would be like $150 now, and that was a big deal. But it was definitely a con. It was a manipulation, a bait and switch.
And they would have plants in the audience too if they needed to.
Yes. So. When the victims, the poor dupes, weren't there, they would have somebody along who would pretend to be a local and I'm from 2 towns over. I'm over there. We're in Dyersburg. I'm from Jackson. I'll take you on. And you still get the people who want to see a wrestling match, supposedly, for 5 cents or whatever whatever they charge at the gate. Yeah, and so that kind of philosophy was definitely a con. It was a con job. That transposed to pro wrestling. A lot of the guys that came into it, Sputnik Morrell, we talked about Sputnik on a past episode. He told me stories about taking on guys in the Carney, and Sonny Myers was another one. I don't know if did I tell a story about Sonny Myers?
No, I don't think we've mentioned Sonny here on the show yet.
Well, Sonny was telling me a story. He was working in Florida. He was working under a hood, and he was also refereeing. And we were telling a story one night. He was telling me about being on a carnival. One time I said, well, did you ever have a problem? He said, yeah, out in Oklahoma. He said, we had this guy that used to follow us around. Every year, this guy would keep coming around, and he would follow us from town to town and take on, we couldn't beat him. He could, in fact, he could beat us. And so he said, yeah, he had a funny name. It was like Finley or something like that. Well, he was talking about a guy that ended up being a neighbor of mine who was a wrestling coach at Michigan State University, who had done this for like 30 years before. And when he was a young man out there in Oklahoma, he had gone and challenged these guys at this carnival. He was talking about, his name was Finley Collins, and I delivered his paper in 7th and 8th grade. And then when I started wrestling in high school, he found out about it, and he used to invite me to come over and work out with his heavyweights, and it helped me a lot. I'm not sure how much it did for his heavyweights, but they had somebody at least to push around with. So, yeah, I thought, small world, that my college wrestling coach was the guy that used to come to the carnival and challenge those guys on the athletic show. Mm-hmm. So that was one of those small world moments. But, the Sputnik talked about taking on 16 sailors. and he took them out, every one of them. He never beat anybody real bad until the last one. And they'd take one on, and they'd go in the tent to see that one, and everybody goes back outside, and then he'd get another one.
Yeah, I remember I remember you telling the Sputnik story. I didn't know where it originated from, but that's some crazy stuff, man. Sputnik Monroe was just a man in of himself. I mean, he's in his own tier of human beings. I just saw a documentary recently on segregation and everything else, and it was odd. Right in the middle of it, there was this wrestling story, which it was about Sputnik Monroe and what he did, you know, to desegregate and everything that he did there in the Memphis territory, Nashville and whatnot and stuff. So it was weird to see a wrestling story in the middle of a story that really should have had nothing to do with professional wrestling. But of course, I knew what it was immediately, and I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're telling this." It was so cool.
Yeah, well, I know that he had a special place in his heart and soul for blacks, you know, which is great. You know, it was a time of some serious racism, and I know he got along, and I mean, it was sincere. We go to the Bahamas, you know, and now the Bahamas is not all black. You got all kind of mixed proportions of black and white and different colors. So you have, he got along with everybody, really. But the blacks that I saw in kind of Sonny King, for example, the blacks I saw him around believed he was sincere, because they did respond to him. They felt like they were one with him. So Busty was a real character and a good man.
Always good to bring up his name on any of my shows, but especially on your show, Bob, because you actually came in contact with him, which is so cool. But we'll do some rapid fire names here, and we'll see if you have anything on any of these guys. If not, we'll move along to the next one. I got about 10 names here to throw at you. So I guess up next, we already mentioned him briefly there. Gene Anderson. We've talked about Ole quite a bit. We talked about Lars and him being one of the reasons why you thought, hey, I might make a few bucks in this wrestling thing. But we haven't mentioned Gene a whole lot. And I don't know when you come in contact with him again here. But here you are in the same territory at the same time, working against the Andersons at one point here. So I was wondering if you have any memories of Gene Anderson.
Well, I have some realizations that have come to me in retrospect and in hindsight that Gene was quiet. Ole was the one that was kind of out front. Mm-hmm. Gene looked like he didn't look anything like any kind of athlete. He wasn't muscular. He was balding. He wasn't big. You know, I think might have weighed 220, something like that. Mm-hmm. If that much. But he was a great talent. You know, that part I talk about looking like an athlete, I sound like a naive mark myself, and that saying that people didn't look the role, you know, because there are so many people that you look at them. If you saw them on the beach in a bathing suit, you think maybe they were sick. There's something wrong with them, and yet they're pro wrestlers. But it's not what they look like; it's what they project, and you know that's where personality and ability to project yourself comes in, and of course the power of television and having someone like Gordon Solie or whoever it might be talking about you being all these things, and it being that you're going out there and someone like Gene or Johnny Weaver or Louis Gillette or somebody like that, George Goulas, going out there and smacking someone like Big Bad John, have him take a big bump and then go ahead and beat him. Well, that made it look believable, even if it didn't seem to be on the face of it. Seeing is believing. So yeah, I've learned to get past that. But Gene was a real power or force in the business, even being quiet. If I have to think about the amount of time in his career that he was on top, making top money, it was probably a majority of the time.
Right.
And that takes talent. That takes thinking. It takes strategy. It takes some ability. Yeah.
Think about the name, the stature that his name had. You know, he was having heart issues, and they were still trying to keep the world tag titles on him, right? Because he was an Anderson, him and Ole there going into the early 80s until he finally had to hang up the tights, at least for the most part. Gene winds up later on, very, very late in his career. I think he's just, doing a few jobs here and there trying to put some guys over. but he was a manager at one point in the early 80s when, he couldn't get in the ring, and he went to work backstage. And like you said, he had his school. So he eat, breathed, lived, slept, Gene Anderson was professional wrestling.
Oh yeah. Again, quiet. I never rode in a car with him.
Okay.
And I didn't ride in a car with Ole until I worked for him in the early 80s. So, I didn't get to know those guys at all. I remember running into him in the gym one time, but Ole anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say intimidated, but by the same token, I felt like these guys were main event. I knew that I picked up enough of TV to know that they were. And I wasn't used to being in that main event type class or strata yet. So I didn't feel comfortable like hobnobbing with those guys. It'd be,
right.
Again, I keep using the military, but it'd be like if you're a PFC or a corporal and you go into the off duty time, even a Friday night, you go to the beer hall and there's a table over one side of the room and people are in their civilian clothes. I mean, but the guys at this table are all master sergeants, all guys who've been in this business, have been in the service like 20 years, and there's at least, and there's a empty chair at their table, even if there's nobody else in the place. If you weren't, as a corporal, I wasn't going to go over there and sit down with those guys. I mean, even if I knew them, even if they were sergeants in my company, because it just didn't. Their experience and some of these guys had fought in World War II or Korea. So to go in there and want to join them and sit down, even in a beer hall, and the same thing, I transpose that to wrestling. Guys that I knew were experienced, I didn't want to intrude into their, unless I was invited.
Okay.
If I was invited, that'd be one thing, no problem. But I wasn't going to just insert myself. So I kept my distance from those guys. And again, I had my girlfriend with me, and I'm kind of a private person anyway. So that's the reason I didn't know some of these guys better. But you know what? I respected the heck out of Gene. He was a great worker. I don't remember him making any trouble of any kind for anybody. Some of the things that this bracket that they were running with the school, it's not very, complimentary or
little unsavory.
Yeah, it is. But that was the ethos of the business at that time.
Right.
Again, it was only one generation removed from the carnival.
Right.
So it wasn't until television came along. The early days of wrestling before television were the guys. Most of those guys worked on the carnival in the summertime because most of the main event guys that would work all winter when the buildings were open. In the summer, when the buildings got too hot, the promoters didn't run. The guys were going to get work. They had to go back and work on the carny. You're talking about being actively involved with it. They work the carny in the summertime, and then they go and work for the mainline promoters in big cities or whatever cities in the wintertime when the buildings are open. So you got one foot in both camps in a sense. So all the things that you learn, look at carnivals that's all like, imagine getting a guy to spend, $15 flipping dimes to win a $3 teddy bear for his girlfriend. That kind of mentality. You're not cheating them really, but people are foolish with their money, and they figure out how to rig every game they can, to the maximum advantage. That's the opposite end of the spectrum from being an amateur wrestler where, you have to earn everything you get.
Right.
Being a college graduate, you have to earn your degree. You have to go out there and do the work, to earn the things. And they're real. What you have is real. But you had to earn them as opposed to what seems to be real, that sometimes are just bestowed on you. Ric Flair was champion how many times? 15 times? How many of those belts did he actually win? He went out there and beat somebody for real. Right. He was given the belt 15 times, and I'm not knocking him. That's the way it was. Every title I had, it was given to me.
Sure.
Bestowed on me by the promoter or whatever. So I'm not putting Ric Flair down, but when guys are listing their accomplishments like, 15-time world champion, I wish there would be somewhere in there would be a testament to his drawing power and his stature and his ability to attract fans led to him being a 15-time world champion.
Right.
To where he could be seen, by being world champion, he could be seen all over the country. He'd go from one territory to the next every week. And that's a tribute to his drawing ability as an entertainer. McMahon came out and told everybody, what they call it? Athletic,
sports entertainment.
Sports entertainment. He's a master of sports entertainment. So you have these guys saying, well, I was a better champion. Well, what are you talking about? Who was tougher? Well, you guys get in the ring. And, both of you are tired now. Get in the ring and see who, if you want to see who wins. That's not what they're talking about, but it sounds like that's what they're talking about. So anyway, I digress.
Oh yeah. So much for rapid firing these names at you, Bob. But that's okay. I still got a few here. No, we've got some names here. Let's see. We've talked about him in the past in regards to his booking. You didn't seem to be a big fan of his booking strategy. But Johnny Weaver's on the list because you do work Johnny here. You actually go over on Johnny Weaver as well throughout this run. But Weaver's really big claim to fame was his tag team with George Becker. They dominated the Crockett territory throughout the 60s into the early 70s. So Weaver was a huge name, even if he wasn't really necessarily on the decline here in 73. So for you to score a win over him, another big rub for you to go over on Johnny Weaver. But just curious if you have anything else you want to touch on in regards to him. I know we've talked about some of his booking in the past that you weren't a big fan of, but anything else you got on Johnny Weaver?
Well, I did him a disservice in a way. I talked about him sending finishes to the Puerto Rico without what I thought he didn't have any experience. So I found out doing a little research that he had been in Florida in the early 60s or the middle to late 60s.
Yeah.
I started in 69. He'd been there before that. He'd been one half of the Southern Tag Team Champions. He'd been Southern Heavyweight Champion. I think later on he was TV champion. Well, in other words, he held several belts there. So he had worked there extensively. He'd been to all the towns. He'd been to Puerto Rico. He'd been to the Bahamas and all that. So I did him a disservice when I was talking about sending those finishers down to Puerto Rico. I said he didn't have any experience with it. But let me put in a new insult. If he did have experience with that, to ask me and Slater to go down to the ring to save Tanaka was a big, big, big mistake.
Well, he was looking at it from the babyface point of view. That's all that was.
Yes.
He wasn't used to being on the heel side. He didn't maybe perhaps realize what you guys were dealing with down there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you heels are a dime a dozen. I can get a couple of you killed. No big problem. You probably heal up in a month or two.
Yeah, I don't know when Weaver first got the book, so I can't say how long he had been, booking off and on, or if he got in certain towns or how that worked there for the Crocketts. But obviously he'd been around that territory for a very long time. You mentioned something about getting a lot of his finishes or a lot of his booking ideas from George Becker, who apparently had the book before him. And of course they had been a tag team for many, many years on top in the main event. So obviously they knew each other very well, and Weaver kind of inherited Becker's booking, so to speak. And it doesn't sound like, and I'm not trying to, lambaste Johnny here by any means, but it doesn't sound like Johnny was trying to come up with a whole lot of new stuff. He was just kind of going with what already worked in the book of Becker.
To give him his due, that's not a bad idea. The deal is, did it work? Did he was able to keep drawing houses and have the money coming in to where, his job was safe because it was effective? Becker did write everything down in a book. The Weaver to have that was a real asset. I mean, you're talking about something that's worth, I don't know how much more money he was making every year for booking, but say it was $500 a week. You're talking about 25 grand. If he did it for 3 years, that book was worth 75 grand to him. I go back again. I got to give Johnny Weaver credit for going as far as he did. He must have. I never watched him work. I don't remember watching him in any kind of match anywhere. Strange as that sounds. And in my matches with him, I don't remember them, but they must have been okay. People weren't, hissing and booing us like,
right.
Believe that crap. He was credible. And again, it was, I had this prejudice about kind of as a naive mark of what guys look like. And to me, he didn't look like he was tough at all, but he apparently had convinced people he was and could do the job, and that's a tribute to his his overall ability. And
yeah, they were on top there for a very long time. So yeah, obviously in his heyday, they went in there and they got it done for sure. If they were making the money selling out the arenas there in the Crockett territory. Yeah, it's kind of interesting here because Weaver is a booker, but he's also still a wrestler at this point. And sometimes we saw that, sometimes it didn't work out so well. The guys want to put themselves over, but it looks like, at least in this instance, Johnny Weaver had a pretty good idea of what he wanted to do or where he thought he might be on the card at this point, because he's putting you over him. So he's not, just going out there and, if you will, maybe putting himself over everybody. So it's,
hey, Dust, how you doing? With Johnny, getting some realizations here, maybe one of the reasons I never felt really like any kind of rapport or closeness to him. Now, let's bring Dr. Dust Steve Williams in for a second. I'm remembering how I felt about Steve. Admired him, respected him, but in the ring, I was on the alert. I was leery because he was, not that he would do anything on purpose to hurt me, but that he just by accident, especially after that first match we had, it was kind of an unknown quality in the ring. And there's another, Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious, we talk about segue here, but Sid Vicious was a guy that you didn't know you just didn't know where he was mentally. He was nuts sometimes. And
so you're saying the gimmick of Psycho Sid is perhaps a little more real than we realize?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Well, think about him and Arn, but
yeah,
Bill of them getting fired for stupid stuff, But with Sid, when you're going to Sid a finish, and he's looking at you, and he's beady-eyed, and he's looking at you, and he's not giving you any kind of positive feedback or signs of any kind.
Man.
It could make you nervous.
Yeah, we need to revisit this because everybody out there is wanting this to turn into a Sid Vicious show right now.
Okay, sorry, man.
No, you're totally good, man.
But I use those examples of saying how I might have appeared to Johnny Weaver. Like I told you about going out in matches where I was supposed to go 7 minutes and I went 30 seconds.
Right.
And I came back and, he wanted to ask me like what happened. And, I just said like, I couldn't figure out how to go any longer with it. And he didn't he wanted to say something like, hey, how about learn to work?
Sure.
Hey, Bob, you realize this is work. But I think he was afraid to do it. And he was leery about doing it, or maybe he didn't care. I might be really overthinking this, but that would definitely put a gap between me and Johnny,
right? In
terms of him having any like real positive regard for me. I was more of a problem because the other boys would see that too. I went out there and instead of going 7 minutes, I did that like 4 or 5 different times. So I was making him like I was disobeying his orders, what he wanted done. Maybe that had something to do with our lack of rapport or whatever, that I never felt any way, shape, or form close to him or even like a colleague. And again, because he was this established veteran who, had drawn, had been in main events while I don't know if I was out of high school yet. But, in retrospect, the guy had a great career. He was another Carl Cox. He went into law enforcement in his later years, driving convicted felons to prisons from the courtyard. When they were sentenced, he drove to the prisons, and it was the way it said in his biography was that along some of the same roads that he used to travel as a wrestler. So I thought that was kind of fitting. But he had a great career. I got to hand it to him.
Yeah, you can't take that away from him.
What was the name of the female wrestler he married? Was it? I think Stu Schwartz married Penny Banner.
Boy, lucky Stu Schwartz then.
Oh yeah, I had Penny's. I was in their home when they were together a few times, and wonderful girl. I tried to find it myself. I looked at Johnny Weaver's biography. I couldn't find it. But anyway,
no, it looks like it is. I Googled it, guys. I cheated. It looks like Johnny Weaver married Penny Banner. Wow.
Penny Banner. Okay. Who does Stu Schwartz?
You got me.
Schwartz marry?
I was wondering how he would have bagged Penny Banner, but I'm not really sure.
Well, Well, I got their name out there, even if it was the wrong husband. Oh God. Yeah. Hey, let's revisit Bob's great memory.
Bonnie Watson, it looks like, was Stu Schwartz.
There you go. Bonnie Watson. That's right. Bonnie. Stu and Bonnie. That's right. Good people. Okay. I think we've trashed.
All right. Johnny. So I got a few more names here I wanted to try to get through before we get to the story about your departure and basically your hiatus from professional wrestling here for a 6-month run. So I'll just throw a few of them at you here, see if you have anything for any of these guys. Feel free to touch on any of them. On this list, the short list, Frank Morrell, who sometimes works also as the Angel, usually a heel, was Frank Morrell. He got around, worked the Crocketts, worked Georgia, worked a lot in the Memphis territory. Nelson Royal, former world junior champion on probably about a half a dozen occasions. But back in this era, he did a lot of tag teaming too with the likes of Paul Jones and a few other guys. So Nelson Royal, Frank Morrell, and Sandy Scott.
Frank Morrell, I think it was Frank that was in the match that was booked against when Carl Cox, was that thing I told you about with Carl?
Oh, where Carl came in and put you over on the way out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carl was in a match before mine. He was leaving.
That's right. You did say it was Frank Morrell. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, I think it was Frank, and that's. I worked with him a few times. That was the one I really remembered.
Okay.
In fact, I saw something. I was looking through. I don't know where it was on, but I saw something talked about the fastest pen, and I was listening to the voiceover trying to hear if my name was in there, and it was 8 seconds was the so-called fastest pen. And what happened? One guy was leaning in the corner talking to the referee or something, and a guy came up behind him and went behind with that crotch roll and rolled him up for a 1, 2, 3 count. But my match with Frank was about 2.5 seconds because I already had him.
There's been plenty of them that were pretty quick and over with that, obviously have been lost to time. And of course, there's been matches that went 30 seconds that they claim went 9 because that's what they needed it to be. So it's wrestling, Bob, at the end of the day, right? But I forgot you mentioned that it was Frank Morrell in that situation when Carl came in there and put you over big time. What about Nelson Royal? You got anything on Nelson or even Sandy Scott?
Well, Nelson, I don't remember. I remember him personally. I don't remember working with him. I might have been in the ring with him. I don't remember. But he was a light heavyweight and a good one. He was a good talent. I've never heard anything bad about him. And now Sandy, I got to see Sandy. I don't remember him at all in that first Carolina run.
Okay.
But I saw we did a Japanese tour together, and he was a lot of fun to be around. He was a good-humored guy, a lot of smart, fun to talk to, good sense of humor, loved to rib, good stories. He'd tell great stories, and he'd make you comfortable to be around him. Well, in Japan, all your stature is kind of forgotten. Whether you've been around 35 years or whatever, if you're over there like 4, 5, 6 weeks, you want to have somebody to talk to somewhere. You can't be calling back to the States all the time. It's too expensive back then.
Right.
You didn't have phones. You could text on all that or Skype. But Sandy was, and then there was another period where he was working, I think, for Turner. Mm-hmm. And for some reason I went around to a few shows. He was different. He was reserved. And that we talked about this in private. He was management instead of labor. So he had to put on that manager's coat, tie,
right,
and keep a certain reserve because I was labor at the time, obviously. And then later, the next time I saw him might have been 10, 15 years later. I'd been retired for a long time, and but was at Gulf Coast reunions down there in Mobile. He and Ronnie Garvin would come to there together. They would drive over from the Carolinas, and it was a lot of fun. He was fun. Ronnie and him and Ole and myself. Those guys had a lot of connections, and I had some, and we'd get together. A lot of good stories. Just a really great guy, fun guy, and a poor guy. He looked healthy, looked everything. A month or two after one of those get-togethers down there in Mobile, I heard from Ronnie that Sandy was dying. He found he had cancer of the one that kills you, that nobody seemed to be able to beat. I'll think of it in a minute.
Pancreatic, you're probably talking about.
Pancreas, yeah. Pancreatic cancer, yep. he had that, and he was expected to live about 6 more months, and that's what happened. So Ole was already messed up by his malady.
Right.
I was okay, but I'm arthritic and kind of stiff and whatever. And here's Sandy, who seems the healthiest of all of us. Poor guy, he had that befall him. But that's life, I mean, it's to be all our turns one day, but good guy,
Yeah, there's a name that's just kind of forgotten in time unless you grew up in that era to understand and appreciate the Flying Scots, specifically Sandy Scott. A lot of people weren't big fans of his brother George for various reasons, from stories I've heard that I won't repeat here to just his booking. And I remember in 1989, it's kind of funny, George Scott comes in and he books for a few months before he gets canned in Jim Crockett, or actually Turner by that time, the NWA. And he pisses Jim Cornette off so much that the Midnight Express and Cornette, quote unquote, quit the NWA there for a little bit. They go try to cool off. But it's so funny because later on when Cornette runs Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Sandy Scott is his number one guy in the office. Sandy's doing all sorts of the stuff behind the scenes. So it's like you can hate one brother and love the other one. And everybody seemed to love specifically Sandy Scott. And I'm not saying people didn't like George, but I'm saying you never really heard a lot of bad things about Sandy, who basically retired, like you said, and he did go work in the office for Crockett forever. And then obviously it turned over to Turner for a while as well.
Well, yeah, I didn't know George. I'd met him, but he and Sandy, you wouldn't know they were brothers, really.
That's what I've heard.
in terms of their temperaments. Sandy always had a smile. And I mean, when he wasn't put in a position where he had
sure.
Where he was like the road
suit.
agent for shows. Right. Yeah, suit, that's right. But like in Japan, just a load upon every day. And George was more, was just different. People are different. So, yeah. But yeah, Sandy's a good memory. I have a lot of fond memories of him, and it was a pleasure. I'm happy my life intersected with him when it did.
Well, that's great. I'm glad I brought him up.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, Videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Now, back to our program.
One other name I wanted to touch on. I don't even know if you have anything right now, and I'm sure you have something. Les Thatcher.
Yeah, not so much in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I ever worked with Les or not. But, and again, it's not to put Les down. If the match went well, that's actually a tribute because that means that everything went okay. But Les was the TV commentator for
Knoxville.
Ron Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Knoxville. And we butted heads a little bit.
Yeah, somehow I figured that.
Well, I was the producer. He was, and Freddie Miller said it best in Atlanta. He called himself Mike Holder. And the announcer's job, in my mind, was to look at the format that I gave him for what the show was going to be and go by that format. Not to pick some places in there where he didn't like it. What he did, he was hooked up with the program director in the back, the guy that ran the board with all the cameras and the tapes and had everything coordinated. That big board got 50 buttons on it. Well, he was on a headset with him, and he could tell the guy to come back to the desk as opposed to staying on whatever shot of the ring or wherever it was. And he did that a couple times. Now, Les was very good. It wasn't like the end of the world, but he did it a couple times that really, 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 really pissed me off because one of them, we were building up, the whole thing was being built up like for 3 weeks. It was the very end of the show, and it ended up with me being in a box. They opened the box, and I'm in there tied up got hands tied behind my back, a gag on my mouth. All I've got on is a pair of undertights, and I'm covered with honey and feathers. And and Malenko and Bobby Orton are ripping this box open. They're out there thinking it's going to be Crusher Blackwell.
Yeah,
and
Canadian Bumblebee.
They're going to have a big discovery. Instead, it's me in there. And before they could even, before you could even really see me, that was one where you wanted to actually let them lead me out of there,
right,
or pull me out of there where you could see it. I've been totally humiliated. Les called for told the program, the guy in the back, to come back to the desk. Oh, pissed me off.
Wow.
He didn't like it. He didn't think that kind of stuff was appropriate, was good for pro wrestling.
Yeah.
However, whatever we were doing, the buildings were selling out. So, and we weren't hot-shotting it. We weren't selling out because we had a match where, the wrestlers were bringing access to the ring. We were selling out on doing this kind of show business stuff, create different angles, just different stuff. The basic things that we did in the arenas were Les wasn't prone to. And Les, I'm sorry if you're hearing this. I might as well let you know, too. That pissed me off because you shouldn't have done that. But it was my call. I'm the one that was going to get fired if the business wasn't right. I'm the one going to get canned, not you.
Well, this will definitely all tie in when we get to Knoxville, for sure.
Okay.
In regards to the Fuller podcast and the things he's commented on in regards to this time period when you were there, the booking that was going on at this time period when you were there. And Fuller, I don't want to call it credit, but he uses Thatcher as his go-between, that Les was making phone calls to Fuller on the weekly, if not the daily, and reporting everything back to him. So a lot of this is documented on Fuller's podcast. So when we get to Knoxville, this is going to be very interesting to hear both sides of this now, because everything seems to make a little more sense. You've kind of opened my eyes to a whole other side of this now. So I'm looking forward to getting there, and we will be getting there soon, guys. I'm still putting all the pieces together. I want to do it right when we get there, because I want to make sure we cover every little crack and crevice of that whole story of the Knoxville fallout and whatnot. So, but it's very interesting. And I kind of thought, I didn't know for sure if you knew, but clearly you had a very good idea of what was going on there in regards to Les and perhaps his thoughts at the time. I mean, in regards to your booking style.
Oh no, I didn't know.
Oh, okay.
Until just now.
Okay.
You know that apology I made a minute ago?
Oh, here we go. Oh no.
I take it back. Les was inducted into the Waterloo Hall of Fame last year, and I saw him there, and it's good to see him. You know, I mean, I don't hold grudges, you know, but when I do think about it, I don't think about that. But when I do, it pisses me off.
I can see that. I can see that. The emotion you have when you made that memory comes back. Right.
Like if you're seriously injured, you know, and you have a car wreck or something, something really traumatic. When that memory comes back, well, the emotional feeling you had at the time also comes with it. But anyway, Les was very good at being an announcer. He was smooth and sharp, and of course, being a wrestler himself, he did his own color most of the time. You know, he and Gordon Soley was even more commendable because Soley wasn't a wrestler. But Soley would do the announcing and the color commentary. A lot of times, for years, he did it all by himself.
Right.
He might have a guest wrestler, commentator, a color commentator, maybe once or twice during the show, but most of it he did himself. So that's where it takes a lot of talent. So, but yeah, Les was good, and you know, he was a good hand in the ring. He was very competent. My thoughts about Les are predominantly positive. You know, I mean, I respect him, and you know, I have regard for him. We never had a chance to get close. When he was the ring announcer, or when he was the announcer, and I was a booker, we were both management. But you know, at that time, I was closer to the boys. I was still thinking I could be one of the boys, I guess, because we did that Plan B and all that stuff.
Sure.
Anyway, yeah, Les was done well. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I think he's busy on Facebook. I think he's got a lot of fans out there. He's had schools for years and all that. So, yeah, I think Les is a success story. And from the wrestling business, there's not an overwhelming majority of people who've been in the wrestling business.
Let's just hope when we get to Knoxville that you still feel the same way. We've got a ways to go to get there, but it's not as far away as people think. Because we're going to skip 6 months of your life here, Bob. You're going to be taking a hiatus here very shortly. The second half of 1973, you're going to take it off from the world of pro wrestling. You won't be back until February of 1974 when you pop back up for the Dallas territory. But first, we got to talk about your demise here in the Crockett territory. You take off, but looks the best I can tell. It looks like your final night may have been in Raleigh, North Carolina. I could be wrong. July 31st, 73, Bob Roop and Thunderbolt Patterson defeat the team. How did I miss this? Of Lord Jonathan Boyd and Norman Frederick Charles III. If you have anything on them, save it for another episode, because those are a pair of guys I'd be curious to know if you have any stories on. But right now I want to tell the story as to why you quit the Crockett territory and left professional wrestling altogether for the rest of the year.
Okay. I had gotten over as a babyface, doing those 30-second matches, and already I was booked early on. You know, I was a fairly new babyface. Was up there with Thunderbolt Patterson, and he was getting over too. But that wasn't the main event, but it was a featured match that we wrestled, maybe next to last. Well, I knew going to that night, I knew that they were going to turn me heel that night. I was going to leave Thunderbolt in the ring to get beat up by the Kangaroos. So I got a ride down there with, and I wish I can't remember his name, but that's not critical. I got a ride down there with a guy that was working as a heel under the mask. And I had him let me out a block away from the arena so we weren't seen coming in there together. So what we were going to do, we were going to have me leave. Thunderbolt was going to be getting beat up in the ring by the Kangaroos, and they were going to double team him 2 or 3 times. And then he was going to come over and try to get the tag, and I was short arm him. And finally,
heel stuff.
Finally he got free where he was just standing there. So I just, instead of tagging him, I just left. So I just took off, and I was lucky because there weren't any cops there. I mean, there was no reason for cops to be down there, to escort me. I was a babyface. So I went back to the dressing room. I managed to get back there because they continued beating the crap out of Thunderbolt. But the way it was planned was he was going to make a comeback real quick. And
on
he was
both
going
of
to come after
the Royal Kangaroos?
On both of them,
Okay.
yes, and beat them. And then he was going to come after me. He was going to come back to the dressing room. So he was going to be about 30 seconds behind me. Now, the referee told me about it, but when he did, John Ringley was there. That's the only time I ever saw him in the dressing room. He was in the babyface dressing room, and they were telling me this finish. And I'd been around, by this time, like 4 years, 3.5 years. But I knew enough to know that I've got to be gone. I've got to be gone by the time Thunderbolt gets there because fans are going to come with him. Ringley's in the dressing room. The referee goes back to get the match started or whatever. I told John Ringley, I said, you need to make sure to tell Alan was the name of the guy. It just came to me. I don't remember the last name, but his first name was Alan. Be sure to tell Alan to be over, because the dressing room was on opposite end of the building. It's like a big basketball arena. They were on opposite ends of the arena. And so I said, make sure to tell Alan to be over here. And our dressing room was right off the kind of like an entrance where there's a big iron gate that slides up, and a truck, it had like 2 lanes. A truck could drive through there. So I said, make sure to be, so this big concrete driveway leading right up to, almost like 10 feet from the dressing room door, which was just inside that big sliding door. So I told him, make sure that Alan is here waiting for me when I come out after the match. Because if he's not, they wanted me out of the dressing room, because if Thunderbolt comes back there in the dressing room, I mean, the fans are going to try to get him to come in the dressing room with him to see what he's going to do. But it's going to kill it if I'm still there.
Right.
So it's going to kill. It's just wrong for me to still be there. So I told Ringley several times, I called him, so make sure you tell him. So it came, we did the deal, everything's fine. So I got my bag, everything's packed in my bag. I pick it up, and I go out the door, and I see what I thought looked like Alan's car was like, 20 feet away in that concrete driveway. I go out there, and it's not his car because it's parked and locked. But then I look to my left, and I hear the people coming now. I can hear the roar coming. I look over, and about, 50 feet away out in the circling road that comes up to the arena to go into that big main driveway, there's a car parked over there where I could see it. It looked like Alan's. It was a motor runner. So I went over there, and it wasn't him. So I turned around to go back in. By this time, Thunderbolt has come back there, has looked out there and seen me, and went ahead and went in the dressing room. Well, the fans saw me too, and about 100 of them came running out there. So here I'm out there surrounded by these people. The majority of them are black, and that's not important. But whatever race or ethnicity they were all pissed off to the max about me being this serious asshole, and now they've got me right there in their hands. So I was terrified. There was a guy who had a gun out, and his hand was shaking. He was pointing his gun at me. And then I saw him look past me, and I thought, well, what could he be looking at? I turned around, there's a guy come up behind me. Now, I'm in the middle of a circle. It's about 10 feet across, and the circle is about 6 or 7 people deep. There's maybe 100 people around me. And I turn around, and I see this guy coming, creeping up behind me. Big guy, too. He had one of those curved bill knives that you use to cut roofing shingles with.
Ooh.
and he's got in his hand, and that's what I turned my back on the guy with a gun. I got a guy right in front of me with a gun. I turned my back on him, and I back up and put my bag up to fend off this guy with the knife, which thankfully he stopped when I was facing him. So I got one guy, I could feel the gun shaking in my back. I got another guy with the knife in front of me. There's somebody else. This guy had a gasoline shirt. He was finding rocks. They had these big rocks that were like maybe the size of a softball. He was finding these out but near the roadway, and he was lobbing those, trying to hit me in a circle. He kept hitting people around me. 3 or 4 people got smacked with those big rocks. And finally, I realized that, if I stayed there, I was going to be dead. So I just took off. I burst my way through the crowd. Anybody that had a knife out, I'd run away from the guy with the hawkbill. Anybody that had a knife out could have cut me on the way by. And I burst through there, and I went back and I ran, and they chased me. I ran back into the dressing room, but I didn't go inside. There was a cop right outside the dressing room door. I wasn't thinking yet. I was completely out of it, but I didn't want to go into the dressing room and just completely blow up the angle. So the people came back there. They weren't going to go anywhere. The cop was nervous as it could be. And so I ended up just turning around and walking back and going to the dressing room, turn around and shut the dressing room door. And Thunderbolt was in there. Everybody else was gone by this time. He looked up and saw me. He's like, shit. Because, killed the angle. So,
well, kill the angle or kill Bob Roop. I mean, take your pick, I guess, right?
Well, oh man, that was one of those first time my life flashed before my eyes in Baghdad. At
Sure.
the soccer stadium. But this was even more. It was more because the threat was right there. It was like the gun in the back, and the guy pressing with the knife. It was so much more visceral, and I had no defense. Anyway, I managed to, I got back in the dressing room, and I was in there for half an hour trying to wind down. It took a long time for the people. Thunderbolt left. It took a long time for the people to leave. And finally, the referee came over, and he said, this guy Allen's looking for you. And I said, well, tell him to come over here and pick me up. And he did. As soon as I got in the stand, I said, did John Ringley come to you and tell you to come back? He said, no. So I said, all right, let's go home. I got back to my apartment. I immediately called Wrangler's place. It was probably midnight, 12:30. And Crockett's daughter, Frances, answered the phone, of course, 12:30 at night. She didn't say. She wasn't friendly, let's put it that way. So I asked for Ringley, and she said he's not here. I called back at 1 o'clock, 1:30, or 2 o'clock, 2:30. And she was pissed off, boy. Why you quit calling? I said, well, can you guarantee he'll call me? I need to talk to him tonight. She said, well, I don't know. So I said, I'm going to keep calling. So finally I got him on the phone, and I said, I asked you to have Allen come and pick me up, and I told you that if he didn't, I was probably going to get killed. And you said you'd take care of it, and you didn't. So I'm giving you my notice, and I'm through as of tonight. If you don't think any more of your talent than that, you almost got me killed. If you don't think any more of your talent than that, then I'm done with you. Why would I want to work for you? The next day I went down to get I said, have my check ready in the morning. I went down, and I remember Jim Crockett Jr. tried to talk to me about, not taking off.
Yeah.
He said, hey, is there any way you can see your way to stay? And I said, no. My emotions were, that's one of those near-death experiences you don't get over right away.
Sure.
So my girlfriend and I packed up and left that day. I drove down to South Florida. I had a guy down there I knew. That's the one that leads in that story of Paul DeMarco coming. Yeah, it took 6 months off, and then gradually I healed. When the money started getting low, I got to make a living. Mm-hmm. I could have done something else, I guess, but I ended up going back.
You come back with a vengeance. I mean, you work Dallas, you do shots in Amarillo. This is all in '74. You get you're part of the Georgia War. You take the NWA's side. Shame on you versus Ann Gunkel. Of course, you're working for Jim Barnett at that point. You're going to do another tour in Japan, all Japan this time, working for Baba. I mean, there's a lot going on in 1974 for Bob Roop, so we have a ton to cover moving forward. But yeah, I don't want to make light of this situation. Obviously, yikes. I don't even want to think about, you got weapons from every side and all these angry fans. And you pointed out a lot of them were African-American, as was Thunderbolt Patterson. And of course, obviously Thunderbolt was loved by white, black, everybody in between. But you talk about that was always a race thing as well. So I could see, I'm sure there was a mixture of fans, however, and you were in quite the danger, it sounds like, and you somehow made it back into the building, thank God, because you're still here to talk about it.
Yeah, it only takes one person to shoot you.
It does. It only takes one gun.
Butthole to elbow.
Yeah, sure.
So, now there was a moment in there that we talked in another episode about mob mentality.
Yeah.
And this was obviously a mob, but once we got back inside there, all this mob was around, and they were about 2 or 3 feet away, like not close enough to really touch me or reach me, or close enough for me to smack them. The guy that had been throwing the rocks was a little white guy, and he had on one of those gas station shirts that had his name on it. And he's standing there right in the front, just like raving at me, like he's got with a mob mentality. He's looking back and forth, and he's just enjoying it. They got this pro wrestler bayed up a tree in a sense and got him cornered and all that. He's just loving it, being part of the mob. But his name on there, let's say his name was Bubba. I said, you know what? I said, hey, Bubba. I pointed at his face. I said, I'm going to remember you. Oh, man, you talk about a guy changing. He turned white, he turned around and fought his way through the crowd to get out of there. That's from going from the mob mentality back into personal responsibility type mode.
Right.
And the idea, I mean, when I looked at him, I think the angst and the terror and all that I had and the anger I had now, I think that all came across. You've got a guy, twice your size that's saying, yeah, I'm going to remember you. He was the guy throwing rocks at me. That was a good example of that mob mentality thing. But yeah, it took a while to get over. I was weird. I was weird as it could be for a while. There was another ingredient involved. We had been, anybody out there, if you got little kids with you, don't let them listen to this part. I'd been smoking pot, I know everybody was. I mean, all the boys were. But I ran into Don Carson in, of all places, Yeehaw Springs on my way down to Miami. I don't know where he was coming from, but he had what he claimed to be THC in powder form. Mm-hmm. And he gave me some. I took it. It was nice. It soothed my emotional. I was emotionally distraught as I could be. But I got real weird. I kept taking the stuff, and I wasn't shooting it or snorting it or whatever. I was just putting a little on my tongue. But I found out later it wasn't THC. It was angel dust.
Oh, my God.
And that crap will make you paranoid as you could be. I've already got this emotional, absolute, almost like a nervous breakdown. And then I started adding this drug that makes you paranoid and hallucinate and all this kind of stuff. I add to it. Well, during my 6 months off, I sold, in order to pay the bills, I had invested with Eddie Graham and Jack and Jerry Briscoe. We had all invested $5,000 apiece. I think I mentioned that tonight.
Yes, we talked about that. Yeah,
so I went to get my money back from it. Did I tell about him turning into a devil right in front of me?
Eddie Graham?
Yeah. I met him, the guy who set up the transaction, who had the money. We met he was a real estate guy. We met at his office. It wasn't at the sportatorium. We met at his office. I flew up from Miami, and I went to this place. And Eddie's looking at me. I'm stoned on this. I mean, I'm doing this angel dust. So I'm obviously out of my mind. He's looking at me, and he started telling these stories about flying, and he kept talking about near misses, like he almost ran into this mountain one time, and he almost ran into this real high building, had an antenna on top of it. He's telling all these ghastly stories. And I'm looking at him, and all of a sudden, he turns in. I know this sounds weird, but I've been on for 6 months now. I hope I don't come across as being sane, but I hallucinated, and he turned into Satan right in front of me.
Oh, wow.
And I blinked, and I turned, I looked at the real estate guy, and he did too, with the red face, the horns, and all that. Oh, my God. All I had left to do was to sign away my share. The check was right there on the table. was to sign a paper. And when I went to sign it, don't get me wrong, I was telling myself, Bob, you're hallucinating. This is a hallucination. I mean, I'm not an idiot. You're hallucinating. That's all it can be. It can't be real. But I had recently just seen The Exorcist. And so maybe that's where the hallucination came from. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make was, in order to sign I had to sign this piece of paper that made the transaction legal. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely hold the pen because this guy, I saw the devil.
Sure.
Terrified me. So when Eddie saw my hand shaking like that, here's this guy that he breaks into business, this fresh-faced young guy that comes down out of college, just graduating from college, goes around all these meetings with him, everything, talking to kids about don't do drugs and all this. And here he is 3 years later, just a shell of that person, someone he probably can't even recognize. So when I signed that thing, he got up and he couldn't tolerate. He didn't even say goodbye to me. He just got up and left and just took off. It just, it was too much for him to bear. He didn't even say goodbye. What I thought was, okay, why would he do that? That he knows he really is the devil, and he knows that I saw him, so now he's waiting for me. So all the way, I got a ride from this real estate guy all the way to the airport. I kept looking for Eddie to pull up alongside him and shoot me or something. You talk about crazy, but yeah, and I'm not proud of that, but I tell a story because that's part of the effect was what happened in Raleigh. They created that. They got me there. Yeah. And, I don't
Very
know.
interesting way to, that's an interesting way to end an episode. I'll tell you that much.
Well, I'm sorry about that, my friend.
Don't apologize. Well, we got plenty more to discuss as we go on. You'll be back in the ring, like I said, and so much to touch on. We'll probably continue on this path in the next episode, your return to the ring in the Dallas territory and beyond on the next episode, guys. But in between, we'll figure it out. And we've got another episode coming up next week, so stay tuned, guys, for more of the show. Bob, I want to thank you so much once again for taking time out. We had a week off, the holiday, and now we're back, and we're better than ever, hopefully, here heading into the summer months. And hopefully everybody can enjoy the show while they're sitting outside and relaxing in the sun and just listen to some Bob Roop stories, guys. So, Bob, thank you once again for being here as a part of the Wrestling Stoop.
Well, thank you, Ray, for making it all possible. You're the best, and thank you out there for listening to this stuff. We appreciate it. Sharing my life is a real privilege. I'm glad. I really appreciate you being interested enough to listen to it. Thanks again, Ray.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap things up here this week. But in the meantime and in between time, I encourage everybody to go out there and follow friend Mr. Bob Roop over at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.